Hi, my name is Evan Vlachos. I'm a paleontologist and I work as a CONICET researcher at the Museo Paleontológico Egidio Ferruglio in Patagonia, Argentina. Welcome to the scientific broadcast of my recent paper that deals with turtle species extinction across the KBG boundary, published in the journal Palaeobiology. Since the seminal work of Rapp and Sapkowski in 1982 and the definition of the Big Five mass extinction events, we are now during the historical phase 3, according to Marshall, working on the recognition and understanding of diversity events in the history of life on Earth. During this phase, a number of analytical tools and techniques are at our disposal, including a constantly growing database, the Palaeobiology Database, or PBDB. Among these at least 5 events, the last mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous, which is the Cretaceous Palaeogene or KBG boundary, has achieved mainstream status because of the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs and the asteroid impact. In recent years, scientists have focused on studying the effect of this mass extinction event on different groups of vertebrates and invertebrates, and explored possible declines in diversity before the impact of the asteroid. For example, some dinosaur clades had declined since the companion before their final extinction. As these clades with reduced diversity involved mainly large-bodied herbivores, it could have affected the stability of local ecosystems. These results indicated that the dinosaur diversity responded to large-scale changes mainly because of the cooling temperatures during the cooler greenhouse climate of the companion Maastrichtian period, although other factors like geological changes, sea level fluctuations, or the floristic turnover should be taken into account. The effect of the last mass extinction on turtle diversity is still a matter of debate. The prevailing view is that the diversity of turtles had been largely unaffected or just slightly affected. In regional studies, Hutchison and Archibald studied turtle diversity with raw field data across the KPG boundary in eastern Montana, USA, and found only 16% extinction. Additional evidence from the same region allowed Holroyd et al. To estimate that 18 of 24 non-marine turtle lineages managed to cross the KPG boundary, that is, only 25% went extinct. Both Lyson and Joyce and Lyson et al. Found that using phylogenetic diversity and counting ghost lineages, clades of biny turtles from present-day North Dakota have survived the KPG boundary extinction. In other local studies, Augustine et al. Found differential survival in dortoid species after the end of the Cretaceous in present-day Romania. Cleary et al., with a detailed and state-of-the-art occurrence-based approach, found a clear increase in shareholder quorum subsampling, or SQS, corrected richness at the generic level across the KBG boundary, certainly increasing for North America and being relatively stable for South America. But when diversity is counted at the species level, including estimations based on the phylogenetic diversity and ghost lineages, a significant drop in the diversity of turtles is observed, at least in South America. Quite recently, Pereira et al. Found that around the KBG boundary, a phase of significant extinction rate in turtle species occurred. During the last decade, joint efforts of the turtle community, led by Walter Joyce, have thoroughly revised most of the Testudinatam clades, allowing the availability of an unprecedented amount of updated taxonomic, anatomical, and distribution information on turtles. These works offer complete information on turtle bibliography and taxonomy, with quite conservative subjective taxonomic opinions on the validity of turtle taxa, therefore allowing proper curation and completeness of the available PBDB data on turtles. Once this set of expert chapters is complete, it will be possible to perform an in-depth analysis at the turtle clade family taxonomic level. This study aims to provide a global curve of turtle species diversity from the Norian to the present, with a special focus on the KBG boundary, corrected against sampling bias and after considering the sample coverage in each stage. I focus on the following questions. Did the KBG mass extinction event affect turtle species? If so, was there specific diversity already in decline before this event? And when did their diversity recover? A major difficulty of any quantitative analysis is the quality and completeness of data analyzed. Here, I use the Palaeobiology Database, a major resource of paleobiodiversity data initiated in 1999 and the result of collective and independent work of hundreds of researchers for more than 2 decades. Currently, there are nearly 1,300 references containing different types of information on turtles registered in the PBDB, spanning from the Systema Naturae published in 1758 to 25 turtle papers published in 2023. Although the PBDB deals primarily with fossil occurrences, taxonomic information from non-paleontological papers is also recorded and helps greatly with classification, especially in diversity counts. During the first decade of the existence of the PBDB, the registration of turtle papers was inconsistent. Whereas at least 190 papers of turtles were published from 1999 to 2009, only 234 papers were registered during the same period in the PBDB, with a delay between publication date and inclusion in the database. For example, the average time for a paper published from 1999 to 2009 to be registered in the PBDB was 8.5 years. During the second decade of the PBDB, and especially during the last 5 years, combined efforts by several researchers have greatly improved the quality of turtle information in the database. Whereas 650 papers were added to the PBDB up to 2016, that is 18 years of data, another 621 papers have been registered since 2017, thus doubling the available information. The average delay of the time of inclusion of a paper in the PBDB has been dropping significantly for recent papers, which are generally included in the PBDB in the same year of their official publication. All data was downloaded from the PBDB in the end of 2023 for all regular taxa of the search term Testudinata at the species level, including both marine and non-marine taxa, as well as taxa with open nomenclature. In particular, the dataset used for this analysis consists of 4,142 occurrences identified at the species level, coming from 2,863 different collection points, with 2,121 accepted valid species based on information from 1,356 different references. Microsoft Excel was used for spreadsheet addition, diversity analysis on SQS corrections were made using the recently published DivDin package by Kosis et al. In RStudio that calculates the shareholder quorum subsampling as in Alroy's default way in his Perl script. Software Past was used for additional diagrams and statistical analysis, whereas the produced diagrams were graphically edited in Adobe Illustrator. However, another bias is the taxonomic bias coming from counting genera. Marshall summarizes this point, showing how different extinction estimations are calculated by counting genera or species. Genera are artificial taxonomic human constructs. The naming of genera and the inclusion of species vary per taxonomic group, whether extant or extinct taxa are involved, the geological period in which the fossil record is found, and the subjective criteria of individual researchers and temporal trends in literature. An easy way to illustrate this bias is by plotting families according to the number of species and genera they contain. In turtles, the analogy between genera and species is about 2 to 5 or 0.42. Only half of the named turtle genera are monospecific, 54%. This analogy is even more skewed in families that span the Cenozoic and contain extant species. Therefore, counting genera in turtles would create another artificial bias that would deflate counts. In that sense, the results presented herein are not directly comparable with previous results like those of Nicholson et al. In 2015 and Cleary et al. In 2020, which both use generic counts. There are 3,827 occurrences of turtle species that can be safely included in the staged time bins of the analysis. The time span between the late Cretaceous and the Palaeogene contains 1,248 turtle species occurrences. In particular, the time span between the Companion to Danian contains 1,037 occurrences of valid turtle species. Therefore, 1/3 of the global fossil turtle occurrences are found across the KPG boundary. The Companion with 88% and the Maastrichtian with 87% represent the stages with the highest coverage, followed by similarly elevated coverage in the Danian, which is 82%. As such, the available material across the KPG boundary represents a good sample for estimating diversity. Given their similar levels of coverage, even the raw counts in these 3 stages would represent trustworthy species diversity values for ratio comparisons. Other stages that exceed the 80% coverage benchmark, albeit with varied numbers of occurrences, are the late Pleistocene, the Piacendian, Lutetian, Ypres-ian, Celandian, Berriasian, and Kimmeridgian. The Toarcian and the Raesian show 100% coverage, but this is calculated based on minimal occurrences and should be ignored. Most of the remaining stages show very good sample coverage within the 60 to 80% range. Only a few are poorly sampled, with coverage below 50 and 40%. Overall, the sample coverage analysis suggests that the available information at the species level would allow the calculation of an extensive diversity curve with bias correction at 60% of the sample. In contrast, around the KBG boundary, the correction could be elevated at the 80% of the sample coverage, or quorum levels of 0.6 and 0.8 respectively. Based on the curve of the species diversity, the highest diversity in the evolutionary history of turtles is observed in the Campanian, excluding of course the extant diversity. During the entire late Cretaceous, there has been positive turnover with comparatively higher proportional origination rates. In the Maastrichtian, the diversity is reduced relatively at the 0.8 quorum by nearly 1/4, and at a similar rate at the Danian, the species turtle diversity is half than it used to be in the Campanian. During this period of time, the rate turnover is always negative, with comparatively higher proportional extinction rates. Based on these results, turtle diversity has been surely affected by the KBG extinction event, but more importantly, global species turtle diversity was already in decline towards the end of the Cretaceous. By the Ypresian, a recovery of the species diversity is noticed at the Maastrichtian levels, and despite some fluctuation during the Eocene, Oligocene, and Neogene times that are accompanied by comparatively higher proportional extinction rates in the Lutetian, Priabonian, and Rupelian. In some stages, for example the Bartonian, the species diversity of turtles perhaps reached even lower levels than in the post-KBG times. The recovery towards the species diversity of the late Cretaceous levels was achieved in the Neogene thanks to comparatively higher proportional origination rates. In Pliocene and the Pleistocene, comparatively higher proportional extinction rates are observed, but the overall counts are not reduced, probably because of the extant taxa. Prior to the Campanian, the rest of the stages of the Cretaceous are generally sampled below 60%. Still, the 0.4 quorum curve indicates that the Albian global diversity of turtles could have been comparable to the Campanian one. Then, another drop of diversity is also observed at the 0.4 and 0.6 quorum levels at the Jurassic Cretaceous boundary, accompanied by higher extinction rates in the Tithonian. The calculated diversity is too low to draw general conclusions during the late Triassic and the early Middle Jurassic. As previous studies work with generic counts, a comparison between specific and generic counts is made based on the updated dataset. The curves of the raw diversity of species and genera are in good accordance for most of the time, showing minimal differences during the Neogene. The SQS corrected curves are quite similar as well, and they also reconstruct the Campanian-Danian drop. The generic curve is better sampled in the early Cretaceous compared to the specific one. A major difference that is only recorded by the SQS corrected specific diversity curve is a sharp increase during the Miocene, something that raw curves or SQS corrected generic curves fail to capture. Therefore, the updated generic curve can also represent the majority of the overall changes in diversity across time, but tends to flatten out peaks and drops in diversity that are otherwise seen more marked in the specific diversity curves, especially during the Cenozoic. The currently available information and the progress made during the last decades in fossil turtle studies allows the construction of relatively complete specific diversity curves. During the last 2 decades, a huge amount of new data on turtle fossil records has been published, accompanied by joint efforts to curate them together with previously published information in open databases like the Palaeobiology database. This dataset now allows the construction of global diversity curves at the species levels, which indicate that global turtle diversity was already in decline during the last 20 million years before the extinction event and continued in decline after the extinction event. Compared to the historical peak of turtle diversity in the Campanian, the global turtle diversity was reduced by approximately half during the Danian, only to recover during the Cenozoic. These results are different compared to previous analysis, not only because they are based on a more updated dataset, but also because previous estimations are based on generic counts, showed herein to add a significant and artificial taxonomic bias invertebrate groups like turtles that contain multispecific genera. Future steps should focus on more detailed, local studies that will test this historical and long decline hypothesis to find whether differential trends can be observed at the continental and/or the clade level. I would like to deeply thank all 32 authorizers and enterers of the PBDB that have contributed and added turtle data, and especially the top 10 contributors: Matt Carano, Roger Bernson, John Alroy, Philip Mannion, Mark Eugen, Graham Lloyd, John Tennant, Patricia Holroyd, David Nicholson, who together with me collectively have added 98% of the PBDB turtle data. Thank you very much for your attention.